Narissa Vale had spent years inside the Western Palace learning how to survive quietly. The royal halls were filled with politics, careful smiles, and promises that rarely meant what they sounded like. As one of the Alpha King's closest advisors, Narissa understood loyalty better than most. That had been her mistake. The palace gardens were silent after midnight when everything finally changed. Lanterns glowed softly along the stone pathways while distant music drifted through the open arches from the royal banquet. Narissa carried council documents against her chest as she crossed the eastern corridor toward the royal wing. Then she heard his voice. "You'll stand beside me when I take the throne." Narissa stopped instantly. Beyond the ivy-covered archway, the Alpha King stood beside the fountain garden with another woman beneath the lantern light. Their conversation wasn't political. It was personal. The woman smiled softly. "And your council will actually accept me?" "They'll accept whoever I choose," the Alpha King replied calmly. Narissa felt her chest tighten painfully. 3 nights earlier, he had stood inside her chambers after another exhausting council meeting, hands resting against her waist while whispering, "Stay close to me. Trust me a little longer." She had believed him. Now he was promising someone else the future. The woman hesitated before asking quietly, "What about Narissa?" Silence lasted only a second. "She understands her place." The words didn't break Narissa. They settled. Cold. Final. Certain. Suddenly every delayed promise made sense. Every hidden affection. Every careful excuse. He had never intended to choose her openly. Narissa stepped backward silently before either of them noticed her standing there. She turned and walked away without making a sound. No confrontation. No tears. Just quiet footsteps against cold stone while the conversation behind her continued like nothing important had happened. By the time she reached her chambers, her decision had already been made. She would leave before sunrise. And this time, she would leave without saying goodbye. Her room felt strangely calm. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains while distant banquet music echoed faintly through the palace halls. Narissa packed quickly. 1 cloak. 2 dresses. A coin pouch. A knife. Nothing sentimental. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Good, she thought. Storms erased trails. A quiet knock interrupted the silence. "My lady," a servant called carefully. "Come in." The young servant entered carrying folded linens before stopping in confusion when she saw the travel bag. "Are you leaving?" "Yes." "At this hour?" "Not all gates close after midnight." The servant hesitated. "Should I inform the Alpha King?" That almost made Narissa laugh. "No," she answered softly. "He's occupied." Narissa crossed toward her desk and slowly removed the silver palace crest ring from her finger. The royal seal gleamed beneath candlelight. For years, that ring had symbolized belonging. Now it felt meaningless. She placed it carefully beside the unfinished council reports. "My lady, are you coming back?" Narissa lifted her cloak over her shoulders. "I don't think so." Then she opened the hidden south passage behind the bookshelf and disappeared into darkness without another word. The Alpha King returned to the royal floor shortly after midnight, still dressed in ceremonial black. His attention shifted immediately toward Narissa's chambers. The lights beneath her doors were dark. Strange. He pushed the doors open himself. Cold darkness greeted him. The room was spotless. Too spotless. No scattered papers. No unfinished work. No sign of emotion. Only absence. Then he saw the ring. The palace crest rested neatly beside stacked council reports. Returned. Intentional. "How long ago?" he asked sharply. No guard saw her leave through the main gates, a servant answered nervously. His eyes narrowed instantly. Then how did she leave? Silence answered first. Then realization crossed the older advisor's face. The South Passage. The Alpha King picked up the ring slowly. She heard something, the advisor said carefully. The memory struck immediately. What about Narissa? She understands her place. The Alpha King closed his hand tightly around the ring. Search every southern road, he ordered coldly. Hours later, scouts returned carrying a small silver clasp from Narissa's cloak. Left intentionally. No emotional note. No accusations. Only silence. Then another scout arrived at full speed. We found tracks. Where? Eastern route. Everything went still. The eastern roads led toward rival territory. The Alpha King mounted his horse immediately. She already made her choice, the advisor warned quietly. But the king ignored him completely. Ride. By sunrise, cold mist covered the eastern mountains. Narissa walked steadily along the narrow border road, boots soaked from rain and mud. Ahead stood the black granite border stones carved with the crest of the Eastern Territory. Rhaegor's land. Crossing this border would make everything permanent. Behind her lay the palace she had spent years building her life around. Ahead waited uncertainty. But uncertainty was honest. You walked a long way alone. The deep voice came from the ridge above. Narissa looked up immediately. Alpha King Rhaegor Vire stood overlooking the road beside two armed guards dressed in dark eastern armor. None of them looked surprised to find her there. That told her enough already. Rhaegor descended slowly toward the border path. You know who I am, he said calmly. Yes. And you crossed into my territory anyway. Yes. His eyes sharpened slightly. Interesting decision. Narissa adjusted the strap of her travel bag. I wasn't aware permission was required. One guard stiffened immediately. Rhaegor almost smiled. Not permission, he replied calmly. Only certainty. Silence stretched briefly between them. Then his gaze moved over her exhausted posture. You left quickly. I left permanently. Something subtle changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. What finally made you leave? He asked quietly. Narissa looked toward the eastern mountains. He promised another woman a future. Understanding settled across Rhaegor's face instantly. And you heard it yourself. Yes. After a moment, Rhaegor stepped aside from the road. Not forcing. Offering. You crossed voluntarily, he said. Yes. Then nobody drags you back. The words hit harder than expected because they sounded absolute. For the first time since leaving the palace, Narissa finally breathed easier. Then she crossed fully into Eastern Territory. The Western riders arrived less than an hour later. Horses thundered through the mist-covered roads while Eastern guards formed defensive lines near the border stones. Rhaegor stood waiting calmly. Narissa remained several steps behind him beneath the eastern gate arch. The Alpha King dismounted before his horse fully stopped. His eyes found Narissa instantly. Relief appeared first. Then frustration. Then something sharper once he noticed where she stood. Inside Eastern Territory. Narissa. She met his gaze evenly. No anger. That unsettled him more than rage would have. He stepped toward the border. Eastern guards lowered spears instantly across the path. This doesn't involve you, he said coldly to Rhaegor. Rhaegor folded his arms. It involved me the moment she crossed my border. She belongs to my court. No, Narissa answered quietly. I belong to your convenience. Silence hit hard across both groups of soldiers. The Alpha King's expression tightened. That's not fair. Narissa almost smiled sadly. You already explained my place. You heard one conversation. I heard enough. It was political. That's your explanation? She asked softly. The Alpha King lowered his voice carefully. You know what the council is like. Yes, Narissa replied calmly. They would have resisted me beside the throne. Silence. And instead of fighting that, she continued quietly, you removed me from the future entirely. Nothing answered her immediately because nothing inside the accusation was false. The issue had never been another woman. It was being treated as temporary. Replaceable. The Alpha King stepped closer one final time. Come back. Narissa looked at him silently for a long moment. Then she answered honestly. No. Everything went still. Because everyone standing there understood the same thing at the exact same moment. He had come too late. Mist curled low across the border stones while silence stretched between them. The Alpha King looked at Narissa carefully now, finally realizing she stood beyond reach in a way that had nothing to do with distance. You're making this final too quickly, he said quietly. Narissa shook her head. No. I stayed too long. The words landed harder than anger ever could. For the first time, the Alpha King finally understood the damage he had caused. Not betrayal. Expectation. He had expected her to remain waiting forever while he decided whether she truly belonged beside him. Narissa stepped one pace farther back into Eastern territory. That single step said everything. You don't know what waits for you there, he said one final time. Narissa answered without hesitation. I know what waited for me behind me. Silence followed. Cold. Final. And this time, even he understood there was nothing left to say.